Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Ina Khazan, and I am here today with Dr. Richard Harvey. Dr. Harvey is a professor at San Francisco State University. He is an internationally known expert on biofeedback, and he's also a maternal child adolescent health expert who's done a lot of work in epidemiology. He's done a lot of work in school place stress. One of his main interests is psychoneuroimmunology, meaning that he is looking at the way that the mind and the body, as well as the general context of the person, are all connected and influence each other to create the person's current state of health. And Dr. Harvey is also interested in regressive coping, the way that alcohol and drugs can sometimes play a negative role in our way of dealing with mental health issues. Dr. Harvey is an author of numerous publications, including the most recent one, the book called Tech Stress, which I will attest to personally is a really wonderful book. I have had the pleasure of reading it just in the last few weeks. It is full of wisdom and full of very practical advice for how we can use technology in a healthy and effective way for ourselves and our families. Welcome, Dr. Harvey.
Thank you so much. It's terrific.
Thanks so much.
I also wanted to add that I'm a product of my education, that I was raised on the East Coast in New Jersey, Paterson, New Jersey, and family migrated to California. So I pretty much was educated in the California system, and I'm going to use mascots as the background. So I've been a bear at UC at Berkeley. I've been a banana slug at UC Santa Cruz, an anteater at UC at Irvine campus, and a gator, which is the little symbol here, at San Francisco State University. And a little possibly apocryphal story, but the Golden Gator, G-A-T-E, versus Gator, G-O-T-O-R, which is like the Florida Gators. But people didn't get the Gator E-R, so they went with the alligator as the symbol. So that's our current mascot. And also by way of background, I teach in a fairly rare program. It's in holistic health, and holism is looking at perspectives from many, many points of view. So whereas health, whatever that term means, can be thought of in a Western medical science, sort of drugs and surgery approach, our program also incorporates Eastern and global perspectives on health, Ayurvedic from India, traditional Chinese medicine from East Asian countries. There is naturopathic and homeopathic and a lot of paths, P-A-T-H, where the pathway is the term in path. So allopathy is all paths. And in a historical perspective, in the time when people were using willow bark and for aspirin kind of things and herbal medicines, the Western pharmacy was the experimental and or complementary technique of its era. So that was the alternative approach. So all paths, allopathy, was what we used. And I make that segue about holism to complement the introduction that Ina gave, because whereas, yes, I've worked as an epidemiologist in a public health program, I have studied psychoneuroimmune and psychoneuroendocrine hormonal connections. That's not my background or training. I would never call myself an immunologist, for example. I don't have a doctorate in that. I have a doctorate in psychology and social behavior and health psychology. But this term health builds bridges. And my background has included a diverse variety of contexts and concepts. And that's what we're going to talk about today in relationship to tech stress, how it is that our technology has influenced and invaded. And I'm using that invasion in the same sense of this world we live. This COVID infection is a kind of invasion into our world where viruses and bacteria and all kinds of industrial chemicals influenced our lives and our health. And some would even argue that the technology invasion is a kind of influence on our health and our wellness. And again, that's a segue. So I'm going to stop there, but thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harvey. That is indeed an important segue to illustrate just where you're coming from in our conversation today, as well as what led you to write this wonderful book. So I'd like to start with talking a little bit about specifically the effect of technology overuse on children. It is something that's topic that's been in the news quite a bit. But I would really like to hear, your view of it, your approach to this problem. So please tell us a little bit more about that.
So there's a favorite aspect in academic, and that's the coining of a phrase. And there is a history of the influence of technology on health and wellness. So for example, repetitive strain injuries, RSI, was a term way back when I first got a project that looked at, among other things, the types of injuries that would be occurring from overusing say a keyboard for a long period of time. And carpal tunnel syndrome is an example of one of those technology-associated overuse problems. And so to coin TAO or Tau syndrome, technology-associated overuse, is about not things like the keyboard overuse, where you might a strain in your wrists, but it's all of the types of overuse. That's the eye strain and the neck strain and the shoulder strain and all the other aches and strains. And I said strain and pain to make a differentiation, that there's a continuum. And what's raised are questions about what are those lacks of awareness that make it difficult for people to slow down and or to stop when they're in the middle of overusing the technology. So for example, it takes about 10 grams of pressure, a small amount of pressure, to press on the keyboard. Now, typing along, and all of a sudden your boss walks in, your parent walks in, your teacher walks in, and now pounding down with 100 grams of pressure, 10 times more than you need to actually move those keys. That excessive effort, that more than you need, is along the lines of a fancy word called dysponesis. Now, of course, that's not a term that we use in everyday language, but you think of an old Greek translation of the word ponies, P-O-N-E-S, which is equivalent to roughly work, ponies, work. And ponesis is exertion, P-O-N-E-S, P-O-N-E-S-I-S, ponies and ponesis, work and exertion. If you add a d in front of it, you get a concept of overwork or excessive effort or overexertion, something those lines. So the lack of awareness of this overexertion is more the framework rather than a specific symptom, meaning sore wrists. There's one called mouse lump, where you're typing, and now if you use a wide keyboard and it's extra wide, you're going to unintentionally place your mouse pad, say, to the right of your keyboard. Now we're walking around with our hands over to the right. We're sort of lopsided. You're going to get a lump over here, or you're going to get, your finger keeps, I'm going to pause over the keys. Do I click yet? Do I click yet? I mean, basically, how does technology overuse affect children? It's a broad question that was asked. And we can go back to both human models and animal models, but I'd like to suggest a bigger picture, which is this notion of how it is that holding your body still, in the example that I gave earlier, was this pause where you're holding your finger up to click a button, but then you brace or you tighten, you go, you're looking at the screen, and at the time, your muscles are more or less immobile. They're not moving. And that tight, that unmoving capacity has been studied in animals, and they call it mobility stress. You restrain an animal, for example, and what happens to their body when they are made so that they could not move? And let me give you two simplistic examples. When chickens in their factory farms pretty much can't run around and go ahead and do their normal animal thing and graze and hunt and peck for food. They get tremendously stressed out. And then the meat of those animals has all these stress hormones going through. Now, how did we get from talking about technology overuse to stressed out chickens? And from a holistic health perspective, we take a systems view, look at the whole organism and not a symptom. We look at a system of relationships or connections. If we look at I just got a sign, it said unstable. If we look at lack of mobility in the human world, we can look at astronauts. Astronauts are literally strapped down into a chair. And for long periods of time, what happens when that immobility accumulates different types of stress hormones? Because mammals are meant to move. We're not homeostatic in the use of our muscles, we're homeodynamic in the use of our muscles. Homeostatic is a term that's used for the biochemical set point, where biochemical set points, I'd like to keep my body temperature around 37 degrees Celsius, 98.6 Fahrenheit, give or take a degree or two. That's the notion of a set point. I'd like to keep my blood pressure around, 120/80 of mercury, systolic and diastolic. That's a set point, give or take, 5 or 10 millimeters of mercury. But we have to know what our set points are. And when it comes to moving our bodies, we are homeodynamic. That is to say, depending on when, time of day, for example, where, location, are we strapped into it, are we, outdoors, running or walking, and then who you are varies by your context. When I put on my metaphoric coat and tie or button-down shirt compared to t-shirt and jeans or shorts, that who I am sets a tone for my giving myself permission to move in particular ways. So again, a holistic point of view is a systemic, not just a specific, not one size fits. And going back to, again, this immobility stress is very likely when we impose unintentional constraints on our movement with the equipment that we establish. So if your chair is not ergonomic and doesn't have the ability to wiggle, so to speak, and this is not an advertisement as much as it's revealing that I'm using a topper of a ball that wiggles, and as I move, my body stays happy. And if I'm not moving around, then it's like some people say, hey, do you realize that the sunset is, in your background is kind of wiggling? Well, no, I'm moving as well. So a little bit of both. And then the same thing about the frequency as well as the intensity and the time duration. Frequency, intensity, and time duration. FIT is an acronym. How often we wiggle or move. So if you have an interrupt program on your smartphone as an alarm or on your computer as a background, and it says get up and stretch now, it's been 10 hours since you've moved. Sorry, you got to move more than that, 10 to 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, because you need to recirculate your blood throughout your system. I'm gonna make a segue statement into the whole body can move. So for example, literally stretching out and your toes and moving your body. If you think of the heart as a big central pump to pump blood throughout the body, gravity is going to take the blood down to the bottoms of your feet, and your calf muscles have been called the second heart to get the blood pumped back up the central core. If you're not moving that blood around, you're not allowing the organs to filter out all those toxins. And when muscles get under strain, they build up things like lactic acid, and that will create a little bit of an ache and a pain. And as it throughout the day, those aches and pains can say, oh my gosh, that was terrible day, back to back to back, it's because you're not moving and you're not breathing. Literally, your muscles are helping to mechanically move many kinds of fluids, including blood, oxygen-giving blood, and all the nutrients, but also the waste products. If you think of the red blood vessels as the nutrient fluid, and if you think of the white blood vessels as the sort of the sewage system, the waste removal system, the repair system, the immune system is the white blood circulatory system, whereas the nutrient and is the red blood system. They're in parallel, and you literally need to mechanically move your body. So why does massage feel good? Because you're literally moving fluids along. And I know I segued to a big topic from immobility to the whole system moving. But again, it's not simply wiggling on your chair that matters. It's that you can consistently move the fluids in this conversation through those organ filters and let the body do its job better.
What a great point. And this makes me think of how often children are being told to sit still, don't wiggle, don't move, right?
Yeah.
Don't get up out of your chair, sit still, sit up straight, all those things that children are so often being told in school by their parents. And that is exactly the wrong advice. Really, what they need to do is to be able to wiggle around and move their whole bodies in order to recirculate their blood, in order to allow their muscles to work properly, in order to allow them, their brains to receive, proper oxygenation and blood supply and nutrients so that they can actually focus on what they're doing.
Yeah. And again, a when, where, and who relationship, because if you're in a theater, a concert, a symphony, a stage play, pretty much for the next few hours, 2-3 hours, you got to sit still. Now, how do you learn how to sit still when our evolutionary heritage would say, no, you should be actively moving? And that is a practiced art. That is to say, we can practice immobilizing ourselves or reducing the movement, but it raises some questions about when, where, and who we are if all we're doing is continuously typing all day and moving our mouse all day and on a screen all day. Then we have an opportunity to remind ourselves, I am not only this automaton, this robot mechanic. Stopped because I hit a pause. I'm not sure if you can. There you are.
Yep, you froze for a little bit, but you're back.
Yeah. And again, what's raised is a question about not that there's an influence on our body, but rather how we recover. That our body experiences stresses and strains of various kinds, partly the strain that comes from constraint, that is to say, being less mobile or less moving. It's how we recover. And if you think about, and this is an activity that both Eric Pepper and I do very commonly, and I'll just add a little bit of some science to it. If you hold your arm out and just hold it there for roughly 30 seconds, or in this way, against gravity, you'll start feeling some strain in your muscles. And you just hold it still, you'll start feeling the burn, so to speak, after relatively short periods of time. And the question, and there's an answer. And if you put your arm down now all of a sudden that strain, that burn, that experience subsides, goes away. And what you've allowed is that blood flow to return. So if we think of two different muscle types. One type of muscle is a fast moving muscle called fast twitch. And it gets resupplied with blood roughly, very, very rapidly. And the fast twitch types start fatiguing in roughly 30 seconds, and another type that's very close, about 3 minutes. So within 30 seconds to 3 minutes, you're going to start getting your nerve endings squawking at you saying, hey, I need to move here. I can't be static for very long. Now there's a completely different muscle type that takes a very long time to fatigue. And let me make a simple analogy to red meat and white meat on chicken, for example. The white meat is a faster twitch type of muscle fiber. And by the way, they're in parallel, they're right next to each other, they're about equally distributed in bodies. And the white meat has to be replenished with fuel, so to speak, to use that analogy, more rapidly, 30 seconds to a few minutes before it starts fatiguing. Whereas the red meat takes many, many hours to be fatigued or to be strained, so to speak. And you can stand on your big leg muscles, skeletal muscles, for hours and hours and hours without much of an effect. So what's raised are, how is it that we can differentiate between the types of strain on our fast twitch versus our slow twitch muscles? So for example, when you're holding your mouse and you're pausing your finger above it and you hold this little finger, you have two different kinds of muscles there. And it's those ones that we need to replenish with fuel, so to speak, more rapidly that are going to be strained. Unfortunately, our brain chemistry overrides our sense of discomfort, sometimes to the point of injury. That is to say, we can override our impulses. And chemicals is a little bit more of a technical lecture, but I'll simplify. I'm going to go back to an evolutionary past when people were living in caves, and when something is dangerous outside, we might go, we tighten, we brace, we hold our breath, we hold our muscles tight so that our sense organs, our hearing and our vision, can orient and pay closer attention to the potential life-threatening danger around us. And for that brief, we're tense, when we're tight, when we're holding our breath, when we're holding still, the chemistry that allows us to survive in the short term, temporarily, includes pain, release of chemicals, analgesic chemicals. And then the next phase, as opposed to bracing, tightening, freezing, we go to a resistance of, we need to yell and scream and pound our chests, get away from my cave, get out of here, whether it's a predator or an enemy of some kind. We're resisting, so to speak. And then the last piece is this abstract fight or run away because they're too big, they're going to eat us or kill us. And then another set of that same chemical or chemistry, rather, set of chemicals that's released to relieve our pain when we're under extreme circumstances, that relieves our pain so we don't want to pay attention to our wounds, to our injuries, to our fighting discomfort, because we need to survive. So it's pushing us beyond that point. So now let's go to the modern jungle. And the typical response is shoulders to the ears, because if we think about big bones protecting the core organs, we tuck in even your knees to your chest. That's very adaptive and protective. So our tendency is to sort of pull in. And now we get sore neck and shoulders, no matter what we're doing, as a natural protective reaction. And then the next step will be, oh, how often do you get to tell the boss, get out of here, you bother me, to move away from the area? And then do we really have fist fights and, maybe in a bar, but not that often either, per se? And we get to run away only at lunchtime and at 6 o'clock. So now what's raised are questions about our evolutionary past and the chemicals that are there to be supportive of a system in an emergent or an emergency way, but now in a long scenario. And so we're raising questions about the things that work well for us under certain circumstances. And by the way, everything that I'm describing very abstractly has been outlined by many, many others. I take no credit whatsoever for any of these fight, flight. And there's a one more piece. It's called tend and befriend. So forging alliances, building coalitions and connections with others is so vitally important, especially in school play settings with little kids. The notion of peer pressure, come on and fight. No, I don't, it's not good for me. I don't care if you hate me, I'm not going to go. Or if you're drunk, I don't care if, I have to walk home. I'm sorry. I need to know that I know who I am. I know that I matter. I know what matters to me. I know that I'm important. I know that my life is more valuable. I know that your impression of me is temporary. I know that I can take stretch breaks, even if I look silly from your point of view, but from my point of view, I feel myself safe and healthy. And that whole set of aspirational affirmations, to use a term, is very useful as a set of reminders.
That's very, very helpful for us to have an evolutionary understanding of what's going on and kind of translate that into the, as you said, modern jungle and how to use those skills now. It sounds like, one of the more important skills for parents to teach their kids now, especially when school is going to be remote for so many children, is to move more. What would you say are some other important aspects, say, maybe two or three important ideas for parents to utilize, with their kids, over this difficult academic year remotely?
A long list. Content is king. Christo Sims writes about media ecology. So what is the evolutionary and ecological view on media? There's the C.J. Pascoe's work on creating other worlds. How do we use our imaginary sense? You have another world to create in terms of these hangouts or these virtual presences. There's sharing pieces where we live in this Snapchat world, this Instagram world. And how do we think about what the picture says? Pictures tell 1,000 words, but be a composer, be a thoughtful user of the tools and technologies. Again, how it is that we're networked, and our notion of public culture versus private and or intimate space need to be considered. When, where, and who is the abstract set of categories. What time of day literally will vary for our biological rhythms, going back to a traditional medicine and Ayurvedic Indian perspective on an organ clock. So the best way to talk about an organ clock is if you eat a piece of meat or a hamburger or a steak early in the morning, it has a long time to digest that meat. If you put that same meat on your belly at past midnight or 2 a.m., it sort of sits there and doesn't digest. So when you do things matters a lot. And that's the organ clock metaphor. Different times our systems are primed for various kinds of concepts. If you have a report develop, well, you have to do some reading, finding out your best time to do reading, which is non-trivially easy. We didn't evolve to read or to write. So when you do your best reading is different than when you do your best writing. And when you do your best editing, sometimes is late at night because you can use the spell checker and Grammarly and other tools out there. You don't have as many brain cells late at night for some people. And if you're just the opposite, if you're the night owl person and your brain only wakes up to read, write, and then you do your editing at noon when you're groggy and you wake up. But finding out when matters a lot. Where you are matters. If your physical space is limiting your movement, pay attention. We pay attention to shift our intention, is the phrase abstractly. Attention, intention, relationships are vital. And know that you can give yourself permission to adjust your chair, adjust your screen height, get it up to where your nose is. These are, quote, ergonomic concepts. But giving yourself permission, nobody has to give you permission to move, to shift. Nobody has to give you permission to breathe. You can extend your breath literally longer than it is now. And again, the concepts from the biofeedback world include this synchronization between, say, our circulatory system, our heart, and our respiratory system, our breathing, cardiorespiratory synchrony is a different framework to consider when we're breathing at, say, 6 breaths in a minute, meaning we take a long breath in for 4 or 5 seconds and a long breath out for 5 or 6 seconds. Slightly longer exhale than inhale is, quote, a heart rate variability breathing technique in the abstract. But it reminds us that we can influence our own space without any permission. Giving yourself permission is the next piece. And then change your diet. I don't mean only literally things that we have an appetite for in terms of food, all the junk food, all the salts and sugars and bitters and sours and other types of flavors as our comfort foods, but also the things that we have appetites for, whether it's binge watching or binge gaming or binge drinking or binge sex or binge shopping or any of those things that we binge on are things that we have appetites for. In fact, the fancy term is called an appetitive behavior, things that we have an appetite for. So how do we turn down the volume, down the intensity, turn down the frequency, the intensity, and the duration on our own? Because our idea, as opposed to our parents wagging our fingers at us, you better turn that thing off. If we start doing, then it's our idea. So give the kids tools to give themselves permission to regulate, which is different. Giving, which is also very important. A model to regulate is different than permission to regulate, self-permission. Again, an abstract idea. I recognize that our timing is pretty close and I want to honor your time. So we're just at 10, as long as you need.
Well, I think, this might actually be a really good place to stop. It sounds like, you've given some really useful, practical advice for people to use. And I'm going to encourage anybody who's listening to us today is, pick up a copy of Text Stress to learn more about, how to manage stress in everyday lives, how to use technology in safer and healthier ways. And so thank you very much, Dr. Harvey. This has been a really illuminating conversation.
Thank you. It's been a delight. Thanks, Ina. Cheers.